She was betrayed by her groom at their wedding, but the groom's brother healed her heart. A millionaire love story that will make you cry. Welcome, precious souls. Whether you're a new light blessing our sacred circle or a beloved returning spirit, we embrace you with arms wide open and hearts overflowing with gratitude. Each of you carries a unique story, woven with purpose and divine grace into the tapestry of our community. Take a deep, nurturing breath. Feel your shoulders soften, and let your inner wisdom guide you to this safe harbor where every heart finds its home. Together, we create a space of healing, understanding, and unconditional love. The late September sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alba Darcy's corner office on the 48th floor of Taylor Industries. The golden hour painted Manhattan's skyline in hues of amber and rose, but Alba barely noticed the spectacular view. Her dark eyes were fixed on her computer screen, fingers flying across the keyboard as she reviewed the quarterly financial projections. At 32, she had earned this office through years of relentless dedication, climbing from intern to chief financial officer with a determination that had become legendary within the company. A gentle knock interrupted her concentration. Alba looked up, her heart performing an involuntary flutter when she saw David Lee leaning against her doorframe. The company's legal counsel cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his confident smile making him look like he'd stepped straight out of a GQ magazine cover. "It's almost 8 o'clock, he said, his voice carrying that hint of playful reproach she'd grown accustomed to over the past few months. "Don't tell me you're planning to spend another Friday night with spreadsheets?" Alba felt her cheeks warm slightly as she tucked a wayward curl behind her ear. "These quarterly reports will still be there on Monday," David finished, stepping into her office. He moved with the easy grace of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Come on, Darcy, even financial wizards need to eat." She couldn't help but smile at the nickname. When she'd first started at Taylor Industries, the other executives had called her Darcy with a hint of condescension, the young upstart who dared to challenge their traditional methods. But when David said it, it felt different, special. "I suppose I could use a break," she conceded, saving her work. As she stood, smoothing her navy pencil skirt, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at her seemed different from the one who had walked into this building 5 years ago. More confident, more polished, but perhaps a little too devoted to her work. "There's this new Italian place in the village," David suggested, helping her into her coat. His fingers lingered slightly longer than necessary on her shoulders. "Unless you're still maintaining that strict no-dating co-workers policy." Alba turned to face him, their proximity sending a slight shiver down her spine. "That policy has served me well, Mr. Lee. It's how I got this office. And here I thought it was your brilliant financial strategies and uncanny ability to predict market trends." His brown eyes sparkled with amusement. "But seriously, Alba, when was the last time you did something spontaneous?" Before she could answer, another figure appeared in her doorway. Mark Taylor, CEO of Taylor Industries and David's older brother, cut an imposing figure in his custom-made suit. Where David was all charm and easy smiles, Mark radiated intensity. His steel-grey eyes took in the scene before him, and something unreadable flickered across his face. "Working late again, Ms. Darcy?" His deep voice was professional, but Alba had always sensed something else beneath the surface, a tension she couldn't quite decipher. "Just finishing up the quarterly projections, Mr. Taylor," she replied, unconsciously straightening her posture. "The Asian markets are showing some interesting patterns I think we should discuss." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Monday morning, my office, 8 a.m. When Alba agreed, he turned to his brother. "David, don't forget the Morrison contract review tomorrow. Mother's expecting both of us for brunch on Sunday." David waved his hand dismissively. Yes, yes, I'll be there. Now, if you'll excuse us, I'm attempting to rescue our CFO from death by spreadsheet. Something shifted in Mark's expression. So subtle, Alba almost missed it. Just remember, we're not a typical corporation, David. We're family-owned for a reason. The relationships we build here matter. The words seemed loaded with meaning, but before Alba could analyze them further, David was guiding her toward the elevator. "Ignore my brother," he said with a laugh. "He forgets that life exists outside these walls." As the elevator doors closed, Alba caught one last glimpse of Mark, standing in her office doorway, his expression unreadable. She pushed aside the strange flutter in her stomach, different from the one David inspired, and told herself it was just professional respect she felt for the CEO. The restaurant David chose was intimate and elegant, with candlelight casting soft shadows across their table. As he ordered an expensive bottle of wine and charmed the waiter with easy banter, Alba found herself relaxing. Maybe it was time to reconsider her strict policies about dating co-workers. "Tell me something," David said, leaning forward. "What made you choose finance? Beautiful woman like you could have done anything." Alba's spine stiffened slightly. "I chose finance because I'm good at it, because I love the way numbers tell stories that words can't. Beauty has nothing to do with it." David held up his hands in surrender, his smile apologetic. "I didn't mean to offend. I just find it fascinating. You're not like any other CFO I've ever met." As the evening progressed, Alba felt herself being drawn into David's orbit. He was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts about the company's future. When their hands touched, reaching for the wine bottle, the spark was undeniable. "I have a confession," David said as they shared tiramisu. "I've been wanting to ask you out since your presentation to the board last month. The way you handled Anderson's aggressive questioning, it was impressive." Alba laughed, the wine making her feel warm and slightly bold. "Is that why you've been finding reasons to stop by my office every day?" Guilty as charged. His eyes met hers across the table. "I know you have rules about dating co-workers, but I'm hoping you might make an exception. After all, technically, I work for the legal department, not finance." Later, as they walked through Washington Square Park, the autumn air crisp and full of possibility, Alba felt herself standing at a crossroads. David's hand brushed against hers, and when she didn't pull away, he interlaced their fingers. "One dinner doesn't mean I'm throwing all my rules out the window," she warned, but her smile softened the words. "Of course not," David agreed, "but maybe we could negotiate some amendments to those rules. I am a lawyer, after all. Negotiations are my specialty." As they reached the arch, David turned to face her. The moonlight caught his features, making him look almost too perfect. "I know you're careful, Alba. You've built an amazing career, and I respect that, but sometimes the best things in life happen when we take chances." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Mark Taylor, asking for additional details about the Asian market projections before their Monday meeting. The sight of his name sent an unexpected jolt through her system. David peered at her screen and chuckled. "My brother, the eternal workaholic. Don't tell me you're going to answer that now." Alba hesitated, then put her phone away. "Monday morning is soon enough." The words felt both liberating and slightly wrong, like a small betrayal of her usual standards. "That's my girl," David said softly, and then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, then deeper, and Alba found herself responding despite all her carefully constructed rules. When they finally parted, she was breathless. David's eyes were dark with promise as he hailed a taxi for her. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night?" he asked. Alba thought about her rules, about professional boundaries, about the way Mark Taylor had looked standing in her doorway. Then she looked at David's hopeful smile and made her choice. "Yes," she said, stepping into the taxi, "but I'm still not going to let you influence my decision about the Morrison contract." David's laugh followed her into the night. "I wouldn't dream of it." As the taxi pulled away, Alba touched her lips, still tingling from the kiss. She had built her career on careful planning and risk assessment, but maybe David was right. Maybe sometimes the biggest risks led to the greatest rewards. What she couldn't know, as she headed home that night, was that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape not just her career, but her entire life. The story that was beginning wasn't just about breaking her own rules. It was about discovering that sometimes the heart has rules of its own, and they don't always align with the careful plans we make for ourselves. In her office, long after everyone had left, Mark Taylor stood at the window, looking down at his brother and Alba in the street below. His expression was troubled as he watched them share their first kiss, though he couldn't have explained why. Later, he would remember this moment as the beginning, not just of their story, but of his own journey toward understanding what love really meant. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to the drama unfolding in their midst. Autumn leaves swirled in the evening breeze, dancing like omens of the changes to come. And somewhere in the vast tapestry of Manhattan's night, three hearts began beating to the rhythm of a story none of them could have predicted. Chapter 2. A Year of Magic. The seasons changed like pages turning in a storybook, each month bringing Alba and David closer together. Winter painted Manhattan in shades of white and grey, but Alba's world had never felt more colourful. Their romance bloomed against the backdrop of Taylor Industries' soaring success, their professional lives intertwining with their personal happiness in ways that made Alba forget why she'd ever had rules against office relationships. "You're humming," Mark Taylor observed one January morning during their weekly financial review. His steel-grey eyes studied her with an intensity that made her momentarily self-conscious. "I don't think I've ever heard you hum before." Alba felt her cheeks warm. "The quarterly numbers are good," she deflected, shuffling her papers. "The Asian expansion is exceeding projections by 15%. "Indeed." Mark's fingers drummed thoughtfully on his mahogany desk. "My brother seems to be making you happy." The personal observation from her usually strictly professional CEO caught her off guard. "He is," she admitted, meeting Mark's gaze. For a moment, something flickered in those grey depths, something that made her heart skip in a way she immediately chose to ignore. "Just—" Mark hesitated, then seemed to think better of whatever he was about to say. "The Morrison contract needs your attention. The numbers don't quite add up." It was precisely these moments that made working with the Taylor brothers so complex. David brought sunshine and laughter to her days, but Mark challenged her mind, pushed her to be better, to look deeper. They were like day and night, these brothers, and Alba was beginning to feel like dawn caught between them. February brought with it a glamorous charity gala where David proudly introduced Alba to Manhattan's elite. She wore a deep burgundy gown that made her feel like a princess, and David's admiring glances throughout the evening told her she looked the part. "Dance with me," David whispered, leading her to the floor as the orchestra played a waltz. "Everyone's watching us, you know. They're all wondering how I got so lucky." Alba laughed, letting him spin her under the crystal chandeliers. "I thought you said I was the lucky one." "We both are," he murmured, pulling her closer. "We're going to be legendary, Alba, the power couple everyone envies." From across the ballroom, Mark watched them dance, his expression unreadable as he sipped his scotch. When their eyes met briefly over David's shoulder, Alba felt a strange tug in her chest, like a warning she couldn't quite decipher. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and weekend getaways. David surprised her with spontaneous trips to the Hamptons, romantic dinners at hidden gems in the city, and little gifts that showed how well he was getting to know her. A first edition of her favorite financial theory book, a Mont Blanc pen engraved with her initials, a delicate gold bracelet with a tiny key charm. "Because you've unlocked my heart," he said cheesily as he fastened it around her wrist, making her both roll her eyes and melt a little inside. Their relationship became the talk of the office, though Alba maintained strict professionalism during working hours. Still, she couldn't help but notice how the dynamic shifted during executive meetings, where once she had felt completely at ease with both Taylor brothers, now there was an underlying current she couldn't quite name. It was during one such meeting in late April that she first noticed something odd. David was presenting the legal implications of their latest acquisition when Mark interrupted with a sharp question about contract specifics. David's usual smooth confidence faltered for just a moment. So briefly, Alba thought she might have imagined it. "The details are still being finalized," David recovered quickly, flashing his winning smile. "But I assure you, everything's under control." Mark's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I need those details by tomorrow morning." His tone was professional, but held an edge Alba had never heard before. Later that day, Mark stopped by her office. "Alba, I need you to review something." He placed a folder on her desk, his fingers lingering on the manila surface. "The acquisition numbers. Something feels off." She looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his expression. "Off how?" "That's what I need you to tell me." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "I trust your judgment." The words sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Coming from Mark Taylor, trust was the highest compliment possible. She spent that night poring over the numbers, finding small discrepancies that others might have missed. When she presented her findings to Mark the next morning, his approval felt like sunshine after rain. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and humidity, but Alba barely noticed the weather. David had become the center of her world, his presence in her life, making everything brighter, easier, more exciting. They spent weekends exploring the city, finding hidden rooftop gardens and secret speakeasies. He introduced her to his friends, who welcomed her with open arms and knowing smiles. "He's never been like this with anyone before," David's best friend James told her during a weekend barbecue in the Hamptons. "You've changed him." Alba watched David chatting with some friends by the pool, his easy laugh carrying across the yard. "He's changed me too," she admitted. But it wasn't just David who was changing. Alba found herself becoming more spontaneous, less rigid in her carefully structured life. She started taking longer lunches, sometimes leaving work early, when David suggested an impromptu adventure. If she occasionally caught Mark's concerned glances, she dismissed them as simple professional worry about her dedication. The proposal came on a warm August evening at the top of the Empire State Building. David had arranged for them to have the observation deck entirely to themselves, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. "Alba Darcy," he said, going down on one knee as soft music played from hidden speakers. "You've made this past year magical. Marry me, and let's make every year just as extraordinary." The ring was perfect, a flawless diamond that caught the city lights and threw rainbow reflections across her tear-streaked cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, her heart soaring as he slipped it onto her finger. "Yes, of course, yes." The next morning, when she walked into the office wearing her engagement ring, the congratulations were immediate and enthusiastic. Even Mark offered his congratulations, though something in his eyes made her think of storm clouds gathering on a sunny day. "Be happy, Alba," he said quietly, when they were alone in the elevator later that day. The words sounded almost like a warning, or perhaps a prayer. September brought wedding planning and a whirlwind of activity. David was happy to let Alba make most of the decisions, though he insisted on a grand ceremony. "You deserve a fairy tale wedding," he declared, kissing her temple as they looked at venues. 300 guests minimum. Everyone who's anyone in Manhattan will be there. Alba threw herself into the planning with the same dedication she brought to her work, though she couldn't help but notice David becoming increasingly distracted. He started missing their lunch dates, claiming legal emergencies. His phone would buzz during dinner, and he'd step away for lengthy conversations he said were about work. "The Morrison deal is just complicated," he explained when she finally expressed concern. "You know how these things can be. Don't worry your pretty head about it." The patronizing phrase grated against her nerves, but she pushed the feeling aside. They were happy, she told herself, planning their future, building their dream. Yet sometimes, late at night in her office, she would catch Mark working late too, his face illuminated by his computer screen as he pored over documents. In those quiet moments, she felt an inexplicable urge to seek his opinion, to ask if he thought she was doing the right thing. But she never did. October painted the city in autumn colors, and wedding preparations kicked into high gear. Alba found herself juggling venue coordinators, florists, and caterers along with her usual workload. If she noticed David becoming more distant, she attributed it to pre-wedding stress. "Cold feet?" Mark asked one evening, finding her alone in the office conference room, surrounded by seating charts and flower arrangements. "Just trying to make everything perfect," she replied, not meeting his eyes. Mark was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "Perfect isn't always what it seems, Alba." Before she could ask what he meant, David burst in, all smiles and energy. "There you are, darling. Ready for our dinner reservation?" As they left, Alba glanced back to see Mark watching them go, his expression troubled. Later, she would remember that moment and wonder how she had missed all the signs. The weeks flew by in a blur of preparations and anticipation. Alba was so busy with wedding details and work that she barely noticed the subtle changes in David's behavior. The missed calls, the late nights at the office, the way he seemed to avoid being alone with her. What she did notice increasingly was Mark's steady presence. He was always there when she needed a second opinion on work matters, always ready with insightful questions that made her think deeper, look harder. If sometimes their conversations strayed from business to more personal matters, she told herself it was natural. He would be her brother-in-law soon, after all, but there were moments, brief, electric moments, when their eyes would meet across a conference table or their hands would brush as they reached for the same document, and Alba would feel something she couldn't name, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about love and happiness. As November drew to a close and her wedding day approached, Alba told herself that the knot in her stomach was just normal bride-to-be nerves. She ignored the way David's kisses had become perfunctory, the way he seemed more interested in his phone than in their conversations about their future. She was living a fairy tale, she reminded herself. She had everything she'd ever wanted, a successful career, a handsome fiancé, a perfect future planned out before her. What she didn't know was that fairy tales often have dark undertones, and that sometimes the path to true happiness leads through heartbreak. As the leaves fell from the trees and winter approached once again, Alba Darcy was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. But for now, she smiled at her reflection in her office window, admiring the way her engagement ring caught the light. She was happy, she told herself firmly. This was everything she had ever wanted, wasn't it? Chapter 3. Warning Signs. The first snow of December fell softly outside Alba's office window as she reviewed the final details for her wedding, now just a week away. The white flakes danced in the winter wind, reminding her of the rice that would shower her and David as they emerged from St. Patrick's Cathedral as husband and wife. Yet instead of excitement, she felt an inexplicable heaviness in her chest. "You're here late again," Mark's deep voice startled her from her reverie. He stood in her doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway lights, suit jacket draped over one arm. Snow dusted his broad shoulders, and his steel-grey eyes held something she'd never seen before. Was it concern? Fear? Just finalizing some details. Alba gestured to the scattered papers on her desk. Seating charts mingled with quarterly reports, her two worlds colliding in a chaos of numbers and names. Mark stepped into her office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the empty building. "Alba," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from the usually composed CEO. "There's something we need to discuss." The gravity in his voice made her stomach clench. "Is this about the Morrison contract? I know the numbers were a bit off last quarter, but this isn't about work." Mark moved closer, perching on the edge of her desk, in an uncharacteristically casual pose. In the soft glow of her desk lamp, his face looked haunted. "This is about David." Alba's fingers instinctively went to her engagement ring, twisting it nervously. "What about David?" "I've been trying to find the right way to tell you this." Mark's voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of steel beneath it. "Last week I saw something concerning." The snow fell harder outside, creating a white curtain that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. In that moment, Alba felt as though they were the only two people left in the universe, suspended in time, as Mark struggled with his next words. "He was at La Grenouille," Mark continued, his eyes never leaving her face, "with Sarah Chen." The name hit Alba like a physical blow. Sarah Chen, David's college girlfriend, the one he'd always described as the one that got away in those early days of their relationship before he'd stopped mentioning her altogether. "It was probably just a business lunch," Alba heard herself say, but her voice sounded distant and unconvincing even to her own ears. "At midnight?" Mark's question hung in the air between them. "Alba, they weren't discussing business." The implications of his words crashed over her like a wave of ice water. She stood abruptly, her chair rolling back to hit the window with a dull thud. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth." Mark stood too, his height bringing him close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive that made her head spin slightly. "Because I've watched you pour your heart into planning this wedding, into loving my brother, and I can't stand by and watch him." "Watch him what?" David's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood in the doorway, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his collar crooked. "Having a cozy late-night meeting, you two?" The accusation in his tone made Alba flinch. "David, your brother was just—" "My brother was just leaving," David interrupted, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Weren't you, Mark?" The brothers stared at each other, decades of unspoken rivalry crackling between them like electricity. Finally, Mark turned to Alba, his expression softening. "Think about what I said, please." After he left, David's charm switched back on like a light. "Baby, don't let him get in your head. You know how Mark is, always seeing conspiracies, always trying to control everything and everyone." Alba wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but as David pulled her into his arms, she caught the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his collar. "Where were you tonight?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Late meeting with clients. You know how it is." His answer came too quickly, too smoothly. "Now, shouldn't you be heading home? We have that cake tasting tomorrow morning." But when she checked her phone later that night, she found an email from their wedding cake designer. David had cancelled the tasting 3 days ago without telling her. The next few days passed in a blur of contradictions. David was more attentive than ever in public, playing the role of devoted fiancé to perfection. But Alba began to notice things she'd been blind to before. The way his phone always lay face down, how he stepped out of rooms to take calls, the increasing number of late meetings that left him unavailable for wedding preparations. Mark, meanwhile, maintained a respectful distance, but his presence was like a shadow at the edge of her consciousness. She felt his eyes on her during meetings, noticed how he positioned himself between her and David at office functions, as if trying to shield her from an impact she couldn't yet see coming. 5 days before the wedding, Alba was working late again, a habit she'd developed to avoid lying awake in bed, questioning every aspect of her relationship. The office was empty, except for the cleaning staff and, as always these days, Mark. He appeared in her doorway like a scene from that first warning night, but this time his expression was different, urgent, almost desperate. "Come with me," he said without preamble. "There's something you need to see." Against her better judgment, Alba followed him to his office. On his computer screen was a security camera feed from the parking garage. As she watched, she saw David emerge from his car, helping Sarah Chen out of the passenger seat. "This was taken 2 hours ago," Mark said quietly. While he told you he was at court, Alba watched, numb, as David pulled Sarah close on the screen, their embrace anything but professional. The timestamp in the corner burned into her retinas, 6:47 p.m. "I don't—" She started but couldn't finish the thought. Her engagement ring felt like it was burning her finger. "I'm so sorry, Alba." Mark's voice was thick with emotion. "I wanted to be wrong about this. God, you have no idea how much I wanted to be wrong." She turned to face him, and the compassion in his eyes undid her completely. The tears she'd been holding back for days finally broke free, and before she knew what was happening, she was in Mark's arms. He held her carefully as if she might shatter, and maybe she was shattering, her perfect world cracking along fault lines she'd refused to see. His heart beat steady and strong against her cheek, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered into his shirt. Mark's arms tightened around her fractionally. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. I'll always be here." The weight of those words, the promise in them, made her pull back to look at his face. In his eyes, she saw everything David had never quite managed to show her: genuine concern, unwavering support, and something deeper that made her breath catch in her throat. A noise in the hallway made them spring apart. David stood in the doorway, his face thunderous. Well, isn't this cozy?" "David," Alba began, but he cut her off with a laugh that held no humor. "Save it. I suppose my brother finally showed you his little surveillance footage." David's smile was cruel. "Did he tell you the whole story, Alba? Did he tell you why he's been watching me so closely?" Mark stepped forward, putting himself between Alba and David. "This isn't about me." "Isn't it?" David's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Should we tell her about Rebecca? About how you watched her too, before our engagement fell apart?" The name seemed to hit Mark like a physical blow. Alba saw him flinch, saw something like guilt flash across his face before it hardened into resolve. "That was different," Mark said quietly. "I was protecting her from your lies then, just like I'm protecting Alba now." The pieces began falling into place in Alba's mind. David's past engagement, broken off 3 years ago with no explanation given. The way certain society women still whispered when David entered a room. The sad knowledge in Mark's eyes whenever he looked at her and David together. "I think," Alba said, her voice stronger than she felt, "that you both need to tell me everything. Right now." The snow continued to fall outside, coating Manhattan in a blanket of white that seemed to muffle the world beyond this office, beyond this moment of truth that would change everything. As Alba looked between the two brothers, one who had promised to love her forever, and one who had simply promised to be there, She realized that the path forward would require more courage than she'd ever needed before. The truth, when it finally came out that night, would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the complex bonds between brothers. But for now, she stood in Mark's office, heart pounding, waiting to hear the story that would either destroy her planned future or save her from it. Chapter 4. Shattered Truths. The night stretched endlessly before them in Mark's corner office, Manhattan's glittering skyline obscured by the thickening snow. Alba sat rigid in one of the leather chairs facing Mark's desk, her engagement ring catching the light as her hands trembled slightly. The brothers stood at opposite ends of the room, Mark by the windows, David leaning against the closed door, the physical distance between them a perfect representation of their emotional chasm. "Tell me about Rebecca," Alba said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her heart. The name hung in the air like frost, making both brothers flinch for different reasons. David laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Of course Mark would want to drag that up now. Always the protective older brother, aren't you, Mark? Always watching, always judging." "Someone has to clean up your messes," Mark replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. He turned to Alba, his grey eyes softening. "Rebecca Hamilton was David's fiancée 3 years ago. She was a lot like you, actually. Brilliant, dedicated, trusting." "And look how well your interference turned out for her," David sneered. "She left the country, didn't she? Couldn't handle the scandal." Alba's mind raced, connecting dots she'd previously ignored. Rebecca Hamilton, from Hamilton Financial? The merger that fell apart 3 years ago, that wasn't just business, was it? "No," Mark confirmed, running a hand through his hair. "The merger was supposed to coincide with their wedding. Hamilton Financial would become part of Taylor Industries, joining our families in every way, but 2 weeks before the wedding—" "Let me guess," Alba cut in, her voice sharp as ice. "You saw something on the security cameras?" The guilty flash across David's face told her everything before he could speak. "It wasn't like that," he protested. "Sarah and we have history. She came back into my life at a complicated time." "Sarah Chen," Mark's voice dripped with disgust. "The same Sarah Chen who's currently waiting in your apartment, isn't she, David? The same woman you've been seeing for the past 3 months while Alba plans your wedding?" The room seemed to tilt on its axis as Alba processed this information. 3 months, she whispered. "All those late meetings, the cancelled appointments." "I can explain." David started forward, his charm switching on like a well-worn mask. "Baby, you have to understand. Sarah and we have a connection that goes back years, when she came back to New York." "Stop." Alba held up a hand, her engagement ring glinting accusingly. "Just stop. Tell me about Rebecca first. I need to know everything." Mark moved closer, his presence somehow steadying. "Rebecca discovered David's affair with Sarah 2 weeks before their wedding. But unlike now, Sarah wasn't the only one. There were others." Alba's voice cracked. 3 that we knew of," Mark confirmed quietly. "Rebecca was devastated. The merger fell apart. Hamilton Financial nearly went under from the scandal. Rebecca moved to London, and Sarah disappeared until 3 months ago." David's facade finally cracked. "You don't understand what it's like," he exploded. "Living in your shadow, Mark. Perfect Mark, who never makes mistakes, who always does the right thing. Do you know what it's like to always be compared to that? So you destroy people to feel better about yourself." Mark's voice rose for the first time. "You hurt innocent women because you can't handle your own inadequacies?" "At least I feel something," David shot back. "At least I know what passion is. You've never let anyone close enough to hurt you. You just watch from your security cameras, playing protector, but never risking your own heart." "That's not true," Mark said softly, his eyes flickering to Alba for just a moment, but long enough for her to catch the raw emotion in them. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. All those late-night conversations, the quiet support, the way he'd always been there. Mark hadn't just been protecting her, he'd been falling in love with her. "How long?" she asked Mark, her voice barely a whisper. "Since the day you walked into my office for your first interview," he admitted, not meeting her eyes. "But you were happy with David, and I just wanted you to stay that way." David's laugh was ugly. "How noble of you, brother. Pining away in silence while arranging security footage to destroy my relationships. Tell me, did you hope this would happen? Did you plan it?" "Enough." Alba stood, her chair scraping across the floor. "David, answer me one question honestly, just one. Are you in love with Sarah?" The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the city in an eerie stillness that matched the tension in the room. "Yes," David finally whispered. "I've always loved her, even when I was with Rebecca. Even when I'm with you. It's always been Sarah." The truth should have shattered her, but instead, Alba felt an odd sense of calm settle over her. "Then why propose to me? Why go through with all of this?" "Because you're perfect on paper," David said, his voice hollow. "The brilliant CFO, the power couple everyone expected. And I did care for you, Alba. I still do. Just not enough," she finished for him. With steady hands, she removed her engagement ring and placed it on Mark's desk. The small clink it made seemed to echo in the silent room. "Alba, please." David started forward, but Mark moved to stand between them. "I think you should leave," Mark said quietly. "You've done enough damage for one night." For a moment, David looked like he might argue, but something in Mark's expression made him step back. "I never meant to hurt you, Alba," he said softly. I couldn't be what you needed." After he left, the silence stretched between Alba and Mark like a living thing. Finally, she turned to face him, really looking at him for the first time that night. He looked exhausted, his usual perfectly composed appearance slightly rumpled, his eyes heavy with concern and something deeper. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "I tried," he said simply, "that night in your office, but I couldn't bear to be the one to break your heart. I hoped I was wrong, that David had changed, that you might actually be the one to make him better." Alba moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "And your feelings for me? Why didn't you ever say anything about those?" "Because you deserve to be happy." Mark's voice was rough with emotion. "Even if it wasn't with me." The honesty in his words, the years of quiet love and protection behind them, made tears spring to her eyes. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight stubble beneath her fingers. "All this time," she whispered, "you were right there, watching, protecting, caring, and I never saw it." "You weren't supposed to," he said softly, his hand coming up to cover hers. "You were going to be my sister-in-law. I had to learn to live with that. And now?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility. "Now," Mark said carefully, "you need time to heal. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll still be here. I'll always be here." The truth of his words, the steadfast promise in them, made something warm unfurl in Alba's chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the possibility of love, real love, built on trust and understanding rather than charm and illusion. As they stood there in the quiet of his office, the city glowing softly beyond the windows, Alba realized that sometimes the end of a fairy tale is just the beginning of a better story. A story not about perfect princes and grand gestures, but about quiet strength and unwavering hearts. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me the truth." Mark's smile was gentle as he stepped back, giving her the space she needed. Take all the time you need, Alba. I'm not going anywhere. As she gathered her things to leave, Alba paused at the door. Mark? Yes? When I'm ready, I'll let you know. The hope that bloomed in his eyes was worth all the pain of the night, and as Alba stepped into the elevator, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories start not with a kiss, but with a truth that shatters everything you thought you knew about love. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. Cancelling a wedding, Alba discovered, was like unraveling a tapestry thread by thread. Each phone call to vendors, each apologetic email to guests, each returned gift felt like pulling another strand from the life she'd thought she would have. The society pages buzzed with speculation about the sudden cancellation of what was supposed to be Manhattan's wedding of the year, and her phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from concerned friends and curious acquaintances. She handled it all with the same precision she brought to her financial reports, methodically dismantling the future she'd planned. But it was the quiet moments that threatened to undo her, catching her reflection in the mirror and seeing the faint tan line where her engagement ring had been, or finding one of David's forgotten ties in her closet. The morning after the confrontation in Mark's office, Alba arrived at Taylor Industries at her usual early hour, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her through the lobby. She'd barely settled at her desk when her assistant, Jenny, appeared with concerned eyes and a steaming cup of coffee. "Mr. Taylor, Mark Taylor, asked me to give you this," Jenny said, placing an elegant cream envelope on Alba's desk alongside the coffee. "And he's cleared your schedule for the next 2 weeks, if you'd like to take some time." "I'm fine," Alba cut in, perhaps too sharply. Softening her tone, she added, "Thank you, Jenny. Please let everyone know it's business as usual." But after Jenny left, Alba's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note in Mark's distinctive handwriting. "Alba, take all the time you need. The company will be here when you're ready to return. Don't worry about the press or the gossip. I've instructed PR to handle everything. Your only job right now is to take care of yourself. If you need anything at all, I'm here. Mark. P.S. I've moved David to the London office, effective immediately. You won't have to see him." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, protecting her from both professional and personal fallout, made tears spring to her eyes for the first time since she'd left his office the night before. She blinked them back quickly, but not before a drop fell onto the expensive stationery, smudging the ink slightly. The day passed in a blur of sympathetic glances and hushed conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. By afternoon, she'd had enough. Grabbing her coat, she headed for the elevator, only to find Mark waiting there, as if he'd known she'd reach her breaking point. "Let me drive you home," he said quietly. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice cracked on the second word. Alba. Just her name, spoken with such gentleness that her carefully constructed walls began to crumble. The ride to her apartment was silent, but Mark's presence beside her in the car felt like a shield against the chaos of her thoughts. When they arrived, he walked her to her door, but didn't attempt to come inside. "Thank you," she managed, fumbling with her keys. "Alba," he said again, making her look up at him. "It's okay to not be fine." That was all it took. The tears she'd been holding back all day broke free, and suddenly she was sobbing in her hallway, Mark's strong arms the only thing keeping her upright. He held her carefully, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort until the storm passed. "I feel so stupid," she whispered against his shirt. "All the signs were there. You tried to warn me." "You're not stupid," he said firmly. "You're one of the smartest people I know. You just wanted to believe in love. There's nothing stupid about that." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. In the dim hallway light, his grey eyes were soft with concern and something deeper that made her heart skip. For a moment, she found herself wondering what it would be like to lean up and kiss him, to lose herself in someone who had proven himself trustworthy and true. As if reading her thoughts, Mark stepped back slightly. "Not like this," he said gently. "Not when you're hurting. If anything happens between us, I want it to be because you're ready, not because you're trying to forget him." The wisdom and restraint in his words made fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were different. Tears of gratitude for a man who cared enough to protect her even from herself. "How do you always know exactly what I need?" she asked. His smile was gentle. "Years of practice watching over you, I suppose." Then, more seriously, "Take some time, Alba. Heal. Figure out who you are without him. I'll be here when you're ready, whether that's as a friend or something else." After he left, Alba spent the evening alone in her apartment. Really alone for the first time since the engagement ended. She ordered takeout from her favorite Thai place, opened a bottle of wine, and allowed herself to feel everything she'd been suppressing. The next morning, she didn't go to the office. Instead, she went to the gym, boxed until her arms ached, then walked through Central Park until her feet hurt. She called her mother, finally letting herself cry as she told the whole story. She deleted David's number from her phone and unfollowed him on social media. Small steps, she told herself, baby steps toward healing. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. She worked from home, focusing on projects that required her full attention, grateful for the distraction. Mark kept his distance, but made his support known in small ways. Having her favorite coffee delivered each morning, sending brief professional emails that always ended with "take care of yourself," ensuring she was included in important decisions without pressuring her to return to the office. A week after the confrontation, she received a letter from Sarah Chen. Her hands shook as she opened it, but the contents surprised her. It was an apology, not for loving David, but for the way it had happened. "I know it doesn't make it right," Sarah wrote, "but you should know that Mark tried to stop it. He confronted David multiple times, threatened to expose everything. He fought for your happiness harder than David ever did." That night, Alba found herself in front of her computer, researching Rebecca Hamilton. The story she found was eerily similar to her own. A successful woman, a seemingly perfect relationship, a devastating betrayal. But unlike Rebecca, who had fled to London to escape the scandal, Alba made a different choice. She would stay. She would face the whispers and the gossip head-on. She would rebuild herself stronger than before. 2 weeks after the cancelled wedding, Alba walked back into Taylor Industries, head held high. The whispers still followed her, but they felt different now. Less like judgment and more like admiration for her resilience. Mark was waiting by her office, a stack of files in his hands and quiet pride in his eyes. "Welcome back," he said simply. Alba smiled, and for the first time since that snowy night in his office, it felt genuine. "It's good to be back." As she settled behind her desk, Alba realized that endings weren't always endings. Sometimes they were doorways to better beginnings. And while she wasn't ready for a new romance, not yet, she felt something unfurling in her heart, hope. It would take time to trust again, to believe in love again. But when she caught Mark watching her from across the conference room later that day, his grey eyes full of patience and understanding, she thought that maybe, just maybe, real love was worth waiting for. Chapter 6. Rising from the Ashes. January in Manhattan brought bitter winds and fresh beginnings. As Alba strode through the gleaming lobby of Taylor Industries, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor, she realized she no longer flinched when people whispered behind their hands. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, that wasn't, and each day brought a new kind of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The morning's executive meeting was her first major presentation since returning to work full-time. As she organized her materials in the conference room, she caught her reflection in the window. Her tailored charcoal suit was impeccable, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her spine straight with determination. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the bride-to-be of a month ago, stronger, sharper. "The Asian markets won't know what hit them," Mark's voice came from the doorway, carrying a warmth that made her breath catch slightly. He looked particularly handsome today in a navy suit that made his grey eyes seem stormy. "Ready to show the board what you've been working on?" "Born ready," Alba replied, surprised to find she meant it. The past weeks of working from home had given her time to dive deep into market analysis, and she'd discovered something huge, a pattern that could revolutionize their expansion plans. Board members filed in, and Alba felt rather than saw Mark take his usual seat at the head of the table. Their dynamic had shifted subtly since that night in his office. He remained professionally supportive but carefully distant, respecting her need for space while ensuring she knew he was there if she needed him. It was a delicate balance that only made her appreciate him more. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alba began, her voice steady as she launched into her presentation, "I've identified an opportunity that could transform our Asian market strategy." For the next hour, she commanded the room, laying out complex financial projections with clarity and confidence. When she finished, the silence was electric. "This is remarkable work, Ms. Darcy," Gerald Anderson, their most conservative board member, said slowly, "but the risk factors are considerable," Alba cut in smoothly. "But I've run the numbers from every angle. The potential return far outweighs the initial exposure, and timing is critical. We need to move on this within the next month." "A month?" another board member protested. "That's impossibly fast for something of this scale." "Not if we've been laying the groundwork for 3 years without realizing it," Mark spoke up. All eyes turned to him as he pulled up some files on his tablet. "Alba's right. Look at these patterns. Our smaller ventures in Singapore and Hong Kong have actually been setting the stage for exactly this kind of expansion. We just needed someone to see the bigger picture." Their eyes met across the conference table, and Alba felt a jolt of something. Understanding. Partnership. Maybe more. The meeting ran long with questions and debate, but by the end, Alba had her approval. As the board members filed out, many stopping to congratulate her, Mark hung back. "Dinner tonight?" he asked quietly. "To celebrate your triumph?" Alba hesitated. They hadn't been alone together outside the office since that emotional night at her apartment door. "Just dinner," he added, reading her hesitation. "As colleagues. Friends." "Friends," she repeated, testing the word. "I'd like that." That evening, Mark took her to a small French bistro in the West Village, nothing like the flashy restaurants David had favored. The intimate space was warm with candlelight and the murmur of conversation, and Alba felt herself truly relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Tell me honestly," she said as they shared a bottle of Bordeaux, "did you know about the Asian market potential before my presentation?" Mark's smile was warm. "I suspected there was something there, but I never saw the full picture until you laid it out. You've always had a gift for seeing patterns others miss. Even when those patterns involve my personal life." The words slipped out before she could stop them, tinged with self-deprecation. "Alba," Mark's voice was gentle but firm, "you're not responsible for David's choices. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But sometimes—" She traced the rim of her wineglass, gathering her thoughts. "Sometimes I wonder if I was just seeing what I wanted to see." "We all do that sometimes," Mark said softly. "Even me." Something in his tone made her look up. "Rebecca," she realized. "You blamed yourself for not stopping David sooner with her, didn't you?" Mark was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I saw the signs earlier with Rebecca, but David was my brother, and I wanted to believe he could change, that he wouldn't make the same mistakes again." "Is that why you watched him so carefully with me?" "Partly." Mark met her eyes. "But mostly I watched because from the moment you walked into Taylor Industries, I knew you were special. I couldn't bear to see you hurt the way Rebecca was." The honesty in his voice made her heart race. Before she could respond, their food arrived, breaking the moment. As they ate, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: work, books they'd read, their favorite hidden corners of the city. Alba found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, drawn into Mark's subtle wit and thoughtful observations. "You never talk about yourself much," she realized suddenly. "All these years working together, and I know so little about your life outside the office." Mark's smile turned slightly sad. "There hasn't been much life outside the office since Caroline died." Alba's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Caroline?" "My wife," Mark said quietly. "She passed away 6 years ago. Cancer." "Mark, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "Very few people do. It's not something I talk about often." He took a sip of wine, gathering his thoughts. "We were young, college sweethearts, married right after graduation. She was incredible, brilliant, kind, always laughing. When she got sick, it happened so fast." Alba reached across the table instinctively, covering his hand with hers. His skin was warm, and she felt him turn his palm up to interlace their fingers. "Is that why you threw yourself into work?" she asked softly. "Partly. And partly because I didn't think I'd ever find that kind of connection again." His thumb traced small circles on her palm. "Until—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The unspoken words hung between them, full of possibility and timing not quite right. Alba gently withdrew her hand, but she held his gaze. "Thank you for telling me about her. Thank you for asking." Mark's smile was genuine. "It's nice, sometimes, to remember her with someone who would have liked her." The rest of dinner passed in a comfortable exchange of stories. Mark sharing memories of Caroline, Alba talking about her childhood dreams of becoming a mathematician. By the time they finished their coffee, Alba felt like she knew him better than she had in all their years of working together. Outside the restaurant, snow was falling softly, dusting Alba's dark hair with white flakes. Mark reached out instinctively to brush one from her cheek, his touch feather-light. "I should get home," Alba said reluctantly. "Early meeting tomorrow." "Of course." Mark hailed a taxi for her, but before she could get in, he caught her hand. "Alba?" "Yes. I'm proud of you. The way you've handled everything. You're extraordinary." The simple sincerity in his words warmed her more than any grand romantic gesture ever had. The next morning, Alba arrived at work to find an email from Rebecca Hamilton waiting in her inbox. Her heart raced as she opened it. "Dear Alba, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. Mark told me what happened with David, and I wanted you to know you're not alone. If you're willing, I'd love to meet for coffee next time I'm in New York. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who understands. Best, Rebecca." Attached was a photo. Rebecca at her new office in London, smiling confidently beside a sign announcing her promotion to CEO of a major British investment firm. Alba smiled, feeling a surge of kinship with this woman she'd never met. She clicked reply, "Dear Rebecca, coffee would be wonderful. And congratulations on the promotion. It looks like life after David Lee can be pretty amazing. Best, Alba." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls about the Asian expansion. By evening, Alba was exhausted but satisfied. As she packed up her things, a knock at her door made her look up. Jenny stood there looking nervous. "Miss Darcy, there's something you should see." She handed over a tablet open to a society blog. The headline made Alba's blood freeze. David Lee spotted ring shopping with mystery woman. For a moment, she felt like she couldn't breathe. Then, surprisingly, she started to laugh. "Miss Darcy?" Jenny asked worriedly. "I'm fine, Jenny, really." Alba handed back the tablet, still chuckling. "Actually, I feel sorry for her. She has no idea what she's getting into." After Jenny left, Alba sat at her desk processing her reaction. A month ago, that headline would have devastated her. Now, it felt like confirmation that she'd dodged a bullet. A soft knock made her look up again. Mark stood in her doorway, concern etched on his features. "I just saw the article. Are you okay?" Alba stood, gathering her things with steady hands. "You know what? I really am." She walked to the door, pausing beside him. "Have dinner with me tomorrow?" Mark's eyebrows rose slightly. "As friends?" "As us," Alba said softly. "Whatever that means right now. I'm not ready for declarations or promises, but I'm ready to stop being afraid of possibilities." The smile that spread across Mark's face was like sunrise. "I'd be honored." As they walked to the elevator together, their shoulders brushing occasionally, Alba felt something settling in her chest. Not the wild flutter of infatuation she'd felt with David, but something deeper, steadier. A foundation being laid, brick by careful brick. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time since her world had shattered, she was excited to find out. Sometimes, she was learning, the most beautiful things grew from ashes, and the strongest hearts were the ones that had been broken and healed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove her strength. But tonight, walking through the snowy Manhattan streets with Mark by her side, Alba felt something she hadn't expected to feel so soon after her heartbreak. Hope. Chapter 7. Learning to Trust. Again. February arrived with unexpected warmth, melting the last traces of January's snow and bringing with it a sense of renewal. Alba stood at her office window, watching the early morning sun paint the city in shades of gold. The past month had brought changes she never could have predicted. Professionally, she was leading Taylor Industries' most ambitious expansion in decades, and personally, well, that was still evolving. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Lunch today? Need your insight on the Singapore numbers." Alba smiled, typing back, 1 p.m., that little Vietnamese place. His response was immediate. "Perfect. Don't forget your market projections or your appetite for adventure." Their working lunches had become a near-daily occurrence, blending professional discussion with increasingly personal conversations. They were dancing on the edge of something more, both aware of it, but neither pushing too hard or too fast. The morning passed in a whirlwind of conference calls with Asian investors. Alba was in her element, navigating complex negotiations with the precision that had become her trademark. As she wrapped up the final call, Jenny appeared with an urgent expression. "Ms. Darcy, Mrs. Taylor is here to see you." Alba's heart skipped. Elizabeth Taylor, Mark and David's mother, was a formidable figure in Manhattan society and a major shareholder in Taylor Industries. They hadn't spoken since the cancelled wedding. "Send her in," Alba said, smoothing her skirt nervously. Elizabeth Taylor swept in like a cool breeze, elegant in Chanel and pearls. "Alba, darling," she said, air-kissing both cheeks, "we're long overdue for a chat. Mrs. Taylor, Elizabeth, please. After everything, I think we can dispense with formalities." She settled gracefully into a visitor's chair. "I've been watching you, you know. The way you've handled yourself since, well, you've shown remarkable grace." Alba sat carefully, unsure where this was heading. "Thank you. I've tried to keep things professional." Yes, I've noticed that too, particularly with Mark. Elizabeth's sharp eyes missed nothing. He's different when you're around, lighter somehow. I haven't seen him like that since Caroline. The mention of Mark's late wife hung in the air between them. He told me about her, Alba said softly. Did he? Elizabeth looked genuinely surprised. He never speaks of her, not even to me. She paused, studying Alba thoughtfully. You know, when David first brought you home, I thought you were lovely, but perhaps too accommodating. David needs someone who'll challenge him, though he'd never admit it. But Mark needs someone who understands the weight he carries. Before Alba could respond, Elizabeth stood. Just something to think about, dear. Now, I believe you have a lunch appointment to keep. As if on cue, Mark appeared in the doorway, stopping short at the sight of his mother. Mom, what are you doing here? Just having a lovely chat with Alba. Elizabeth smiled mysteriously. Don't let me keep you from your working lunch. After she left, Mark turned to Alba with concern. Everything okay? Your mother is interesting, Alba said carefully. Mark's laugh was warm. That's diplomatic. Ready to escape? The Vietnamese restaurant was tiny and authentic, tucked away in a basement on a side street. They claimed their usual corner table, and Mark immediately launched into questions about the Singapore negotiations. But Alba found herself distracted, studying him as he talked, the way his hands moved expressively, the slight crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, the passionate intelligence that drove every discussion. Alba. Mark's voice brought her back to the present. You seem a million miles away. Your mother mentioned Caroline, she said softly. Mark's expression softened. Ah, that explains the thoughtful look. She seemed surprised that you'd told me about her. I am too, sometimes. Mark played with his chopsticks, gathering his thoughts. With you, it just feels natural to share things. Even the hard things. Maybe especially those. The honesty in his voice made her reach across the table, covering his hand with hers. This time, neither of them pulled away. Their moment was interrupted by Alba's phone buzzing insistently. It was Jenny. Miss Darcy? I'm so sorry to interrupt your lunch, but there's a situation. The London office just sent over some concerning documents about the Morrison contract. From when Mr. David Lee was handling it. Alba felt Mark's hand tighten under hers. We'll be right there. The situation was worse than they'd imagined. David had apparently made unauthorized promises to investors, committing Taylor Industries to terms that could jeopardize the entire Asian expansion. He must have known this would come to light eventually, Alba said, poring over the documents in Mark's office hours later. Why would he? Because he never thinks about consequences, Mark said grimly. He assumes someone else will clean up his messes, usually me. Alba stood, pacing the office. We need to restructure the entire deal, fast, before word gets out and investors panic. It'll mean late nights, emergency meetings, Mark warned. Then it's a good thing I have nothing better to do, Alba said with a determined smile. Besides, I work better under pressure. We work better under pressure, Mark corrected softly. They threw themselves into damage control, working side by side into the night. Around midnight, Alba realized they'd been sharing Mark's desk for hours, their shoulders touching as they reviewed documents, completing each other's thoughts as they drafted new proposals. We should take a break, Mark suggested, noticing her stifle a yawn. There's a great all-night diner around the corner. The diner was eerily quiet at that hour, just a few other late-night workers seeking refuge in coffee and comfort food. Over grilled cheese sandwiches and endless coffee refills, their conversation drifted from work to more personal matters. Do you ever wonder, Alba asked, what would have happened if you'd met me first? Before David. Mark was quiet for a long moment. Every day, he finally admitted. But then I wonder if we would have been ready for each other then. You needed to learn who you were beyond other people's expectations, and I needed to learn how to open my heart again after Caroline. And now... Alba's voice was barely a whisper. Mark reached across the table, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm. Now, I think maybe everything happened exactly as it needed to for us to find our way here. The honesty of the moment, the gentle touch of his hand, the late hour, it all combined to make Alba feel brave. She leaned across the table and kissed him. It was nothing like kissing David had been. This was slower, deeper, full of understanding and shared experiences. When they finally parted, Mark's eyes were dark with emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "There's no rush. We can take all the time you need." Alba smiled, realizing that this was what real love felt like, not grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but quiet concern and endless patience. "I'm sure," she said. "I think maybe I've been sure for a while now." They walked back to the office hand in hand, the city quiet around them. The crisis wasn't resolved. They still had days of work ahead to fix David's mess. But somehow it felt manageable now, knowing they would face it together. As they gathered their things to finally head home, Mark pulled Alba close, just holding her for a moment. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For being brave enough to trust again. I know it wasn't easy." Alba looked up at him, seeing all the love and understanding in his eyes. Some things are worth the risk. The next morning, when Alba arrived at work, she found a single white rose on her desk with a note. "To new beginnings, M." She smiled, touching the delicate petals. Yes, some things were definitely worth the risk. Chapter 8. Headlines and Heart Truths. Spring arrived in Manhattan with cherry blossoms and whispers. The first published photo of Alba and Mark together appeared in the society pages on a Tuesday, a seemingly candid shot of them leaving a restaurant, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back, both of them laughing at something unseen. The headline read, "Taylor Industries Power Couple, Love in the Boardroom." Alba found the magazine on her desk that morning, clearly placed there by a well-meaning Jenny. Before she could process her reaction, her phone lit up with a text from Mark. "Have you seen it?" "I'm sorry, I should have been more careful in public." She smiled, typing back, "Nothing to be sorry for. I'm not hiding anymore." Her response was met with immediate footsteps. Mark appearing in her doorway, looking both concerned and hopeful. "Are you sure? The press will be relentless. They love a scandal." "Is that what we are?" Alba stood, moving around her desk to face him. "A scandal?" "No," Mark said firmly, reaching for her hand. "We're the best decision I've ever made." The moment was interrupted by Jenny clearing her throat discreetly. "Ms. Darcy, the Singapore investors are on line 1, and Mrs. Taylor is asking to see both of you in the executive dining room for lunch." Mark's grip on Alba's hand tightened slightly. "Mother moves fast. Should I be worried?" His smile was reassuring. "Not with you by my side." The morning passed in a whirlwind of calls and meetings about the Asian expansion. They had managed to contain most of the damage from David's mishandling of the Morrison contract, but it had required extensive restructuring and countless hours of work. Through it all, Mark and Alba had grown even closer, their professional partnership strengthening alongside their personal relationship. At precisely noon, they made their way to the executive dining room. Elizabeth Taylor was already there, impeccable as always in Dior, sipping champagne. "Darlings," she greeted them, gesturing to the seats across from her. "I thought we should discuss this latest development over proper lunch." As servers brought in the first course, Elizabeth studied them thoughtfully. "The board is concerned," she began without preamble. A romantic relationship between the CEO and CFO is complicated territory. Mother, Mark started, but Elizabeth held up a hand. Let me finish. The board is concerned, but I reminded them that your combined leadership has brought Taylor Industries its most successful quarter in decades, the Asian expansion alone. She smiled slightly. Well, let's just say numbers speak louder than gossip. Alba felt herself relax slightly. So, you're not opposed to our relationship? Opposed? Elizabeth laughed softly. My dear, I've been watching you two dance around each other for years. Even when you were engaged to David, especially then, it was clear to anyone with eyes where the real connection lay. You never said anything, Mark said quietly. It wasn't my place. Elizabeth's expression softened. After Caroline, I wasn't sure you'd ever open your heart again, Mark. And Alba. You needed to find your own way here. Some things can't be rushed. The lunch continued more casually after that, with Elizabeth sharing embarrassing stories from Mark's childhood that made him groan and Alba laugh. As they were finishing their coffee, Elizabeth turned serious again. There is one thing you should know, she said. David called this morning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. What did he want? Mark asked, his voice tight. To warn me about potential complications with the Morrison contract coming to light, as if I didn't already know what he'd done. Elizabeth's voice was cold. He also mentioned he's engaged to Sarah Chen. They're planning a summer wedding in the Hamptons. Alba felt Mark tense beside her, ready to protect her from this news, but surprisingly, she felt nothing but relief. Good, she said simply. I hope they're very happy together. Elizabeth's approving smile told her she'd passed some sort of test. Back in Alba's office later that afternoon, Mark paced nervously. Are you really okay about David and Sarah? Alba caught his hand, pulling him to a stop. Mark, look at me. When he did, she continued, David and Sarah aren't even real people to me anymore. They're just characters in a story that helped lead me here, to you. The kiss he gave her then was worth 1,000 headlines. The next few weeks brought both challenges and triumphs. The press continued to speculate about their relationship, but Alba found she didn't mind. They were professional at work, maintaining appropriate boundaries, but they no longer hid their connection. If anything, their relationship seemed to inspire others. Jenny confided that office morale had never been higher. People like seeing a love story with substance, she explained, especially after, well, you know. The real test came during a crucial board meeting about the Asian expansion. Some board members questioned whether their relationship would cloud their judgment on major decisions. Alba addressed the concern head-on. Gentlemen, she said, standing tall at the head of the conference table, Mark and I have always put Taylor Industries first. Our personal relationship hasn't changed that. If anything, it's enhanced our ability to work together effectively. The numbers speak for themselves. She proceeded to lay out the latest projections, showing how their joint leadership had not only salvaged the Morrison situation, but turned it into an opportunity for greater growth. And yes, she concluded, we're in love, but we're also professionals who have earned our positions through hard work and proven results. Judge us on those results. After the meeting, Mark found her in her office. That was incredible, he said, closing the door behind him. You never cease to amaze me. I meant every word, Alba replied, especially the part about being in love. It was the first time either of them had said it directly, though they'd both known it for weeks. Mark crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. I love you, he whispered against her hair, more than I thought possible after Caroline. Different than I thought possible. Different how? With Caroline I was young, everything was new. I loved her completely, but simply. He pulled back to look into her eyes. With you, it's deeper, more complex. You challenge me, match me, make me better. You understand both my strengths and my scars. Alba reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines of worry that seemed to fade whenever he smiled at her. I love you too, not because you saved me or protected me, but because you let me save myself. You gave me space to heal and strength to grow. Their moment was interrupted by Jenny's urgent knock. Miss Darcy, Mr. Taylor, Rebecca Hamilton is on line 1. She says it's important. The call brought unexpected news. Rebecca had uncovered more evidence of David's financial misconduct, predating even the Morrison contract. She was willing to testify to the board about everything she knew. This could have serious implications for the company, Mark said after they hung up, if it goes public. Then we'll face it together, Alba finished firmly, like we do everything else. Later that evening, as they walked through Central Park hand in hand, neither caring who might see them, Alba reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, she'd thought her heart was permanently broken. Now she understood that some breaks were necessary. They created space for something stronger to grow. "What are you thinking about?" Mark asked, pulling her closer as the evening air grew cool. "About how life never turns out quite how we expect," she replied, "and how sometimes that's the best thing that could happen to us." Mark stopped walking, turning to face her in the gathering twilight. Speaking of unexpected things, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Mark ... Alba's heart raced. "This isn't a proposal," he said quickly. "Not yet. We're not ready for that, and that's okay. This is a promise to keep choosing each other every day through whatever comes next, whether that's board meetings or family drama or just quiet Sunday mornings reading the paper together." Inside the box was a delicate sapphire ring, nothing like the flashy diamond David had given her. "It was Caroline's favorite," Mark said softly. "She made me promise before she died that if I ever found love again, I'd pass it on. She said real love deserves real history." Tears pricked Alba's eyes as Mark slipped the ring onto her right hand. A promise for the future, not a claim on the present. "It's perfect," she whispered, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of hopes and possibilities. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to a love story that had grown not from fairy tale romance, but from shared strength, mutual respect, and the courage to believe in second chances. Chapter 9. Truth and Consequences. The London spring rain fell in sheets outside Rebecca Hamilton's office window as she laid out the evidence before Alba and Mark. They had flown in overnight after Rebecca's cryptic call, and what she showed them made the urgent trip more than worthwhile. David wasn't just making unauthorized promises with the Morrison contract, Rebecca explained, spreading documents across her mahogany desk. He was running a complex scheme through multiple shell companies, using Taylor Industries' reputation to secure investments that were being diverted elsewhere. Alba studied the paper trail with growing horror. Her expert eye for financial patterns revealed the full scope of David's deception. "These transactions go back years. Even during our engagement, he was setting up his escape plan," Mark finished grimly. His hand found hers under the table, offering silent support. Rebecca watched their interaction with a knowing smile. "I must say, seeing you two together makes so much sense. You balance each other perfectly." "Unlike some people we know," Alba said dryly, earning a quiet laugh from both Mark and Rebecca. "Speaking of," Rebecca pulled up an email on her screen. "Sarah Chen reached out to me yesterday. Apparently she's having second thoughts about the wedding. Something about finding suspicious transfers in their joint accounts." Mark's jaw tightened. History repeating itself. Not exactly. Rebecca's smile was sharp. This time we have enough evidence to stop him before he hurts anyone else. The meeting stretched into lunch, which Rebecca ordered in from her favorite Indian restaurant. As they ate, the conversation shifted from business to personal matters. "I never properly thanked you," Alba said to Rebecca, "for reaching out to me after everything. Your email helped more than you know. We survivors have to stick together." Rebecca raised her glass in a toast. "Though I must say, you handled it all with far more grace than I did. Running away to London wasn't my proudest moment." "You didn't run away," Mark interjected. "You rebuilt yourself. There's a difference." Rebecca's expression softened. "You always did see the best in people, Mark. Well, except when it came to David, but there you were right all along." The afternoon brought more revelations as they dug deeper into David's financial maze. By evening, they had compiled enough evidence to present to the Taylor Industries Board and, if necessary, to regulatory authorities. "Stay at my place tonight," Rebecca insisted as they wrapped up. "Both of you. We'll open some wine and you can tell me how this happened." She gestured between them with a smile. Rebecca's Mayfair apartment was elegant and comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Over bottles of excellent Bordeaux, they shared their story, the long path from friendship to understanding to love. "I knew it," Rebecca declared. "Even back then, I could see how Mark looked at you, Alba, though he tried very hard to hide it." "Not hard enough, apparently," Mark said ruefully, pulling Alba closer on the sofa. "Oh, please, you were the very model of propriety. It was only obvious to someone who knew what to look for." Rebecca's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, after David, I thought I'd never trust anyone again, but seeing you two, it gives me hope." Later that night, in the guest room of Rebecca's apartment, Alba lay awake watching London's lights twinkle beyond the window. Mark's arm was draped protectively around her waist, his breathing steady against her neck. "Can't sleep," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Just thinking," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "About how different everything could have been if I'd married David." "Don't," Mark said softly, touching her face. "We can't change the past, but we can learn from it." "I have learned," Alba smiled, tracing his jawline with her fingers. "I learned that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about being there in the hard times, supporting each other through challenges, building something stronger together." Mark caught her hand, kissing her palm. "Speaking of challenges, are you ready for tomorrow?" Tomorrow would bring a video conference with the Taylor Industries Board, where they would present their findings about David's misconduct. It would be difficult, potentially damaging to the company's reputation, but necessary. "Ready as I'll ever be," Alba sighed. "At least we're facing it together." The board meeting the next morning was tense, but productive. As Alba and Mark laid out the evidence from Rebecca's investigation, the director's expressions ranged from shock to anger to resignation. "This is a disaster," Gerald Anderson declared. "The press will have a field day." "Not necessarily," Alba stepped in smoothly. "We've prepared a strategy to address this internally first, protecting shareholder interests while maintaining transparency where it matters most." She outlined her plan. A careful restructuring of the affected investments, enhanced oversight procedures, and a proactive approach to making things right with any impacted parties. "The key is to act decisively, but discreetly," Mark added, supporting her presentation with additional details. "We need to show our investors and partners that Taylor Industries' integrity remains uncompromised, regardless of one person's actions." The board ultimately agreed to their proposed course of action, though the vote wasn't unanimous. As they left the video conference, Mark pulled Alba into his office. "You were brilliant," he said, kissing her softly. "The way you handled Anderson's objections." "We were brilliant," Alba corrected. "We make a good team." "The best." Mark's expression turned serious. "But you should know, this isn't over. When David realizes we're onto him, he'll lash out," Alba finished. "I know, but I'm not afraid of him anymore." As if summoned by their conversation, Alba's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. David and Sarah at some society event, her wearing Alba's old engagement ring. "Subtle," Alba said dryly, showing Mark the photo. "He's trying to hurt you," Mark growled, protective instinct flaring. "No," Alba said thoughtfully. "He's trying to convince himself he's happy. The David Lee I knew would never recycle an engagement ring." Mark's laugh was surprised and genuine. "Have I told you lately how remarkable you are?" "Yes, but I don't mind hearing it again." Their moment was interrupted by Jenny rushing in. "Miss Darcy, Mr. Taylor, David Lee just arrived in the lobby. He's demanding to see both of you." Mark and Alba exchanged glances. This was it, the confrontation they'd been expecting. "Send him up," Mark said firmly. "It's time to end this." As they waited for David to arrive, Alba felt strangely calm. 6 months ago, she'd been heartbroken at the thought of losing David's love. Now, standing beside Mark, she understood that what she'd lost hadn't been love at all, just its pale imitation. "Whatever happens," Mark said quietly, taking her hand, "we face it together." Alba squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. Together. The elevator dinged, and David Lee stepped out, looking less polished than usual, his customary charm replaced by barely contained fury. The confrontation that would follow would change everything, but Alba was ready. With Mark by her side, she could face anything. Sometimes, she reflected, the hardest battles led to the greatest victories. And this battle wasn't just about exposing David's misconduct. It was about standing up for truth, for justice, and for the kind of love that made you stronger instead of breaking you. The real test was about to begin. Chapter 10. Storms and Shelter. David Lee stood in the doorway of Mark's office, his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. His designer suit was slightly rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes held a wild edge that made Alba instinctively step closer to Mark. "Well, isn't this cozy?" David's voice dripped with sarcasm. "The perfect power couple, plotting my downfall together. How long have you been planning this, brother?" Mark's hand found Alba's, his touch steady and grounding. "This isn't about us, David. This is about your choices and their consequences." "My choices," David laughed harshly. "What about your choices, Mark? Watching me through security cameras, digging through my files, turning my ex-fiancée against me." "You did that all on your own," Alba said quietly, finding her voice. "No one had to turn me against you. Your actions spoke for themselves." David's attention snapped to her, his expression darkening. "And you. I should have known you'd side with him. You two deserve each other. So proper, so perfect, so convinced of your own righteousness." "That's enough." Mark's voice was steel. "We know about the shell companies, David, the diverted investments, all of it." The color drained from David's face. "You're bluffing." Alba moved to Mark's desk, pulling up the files Rebecca had provided. "Singapore Holdings, Blue Ocean Ventures, Crown Point Investments. Should I go on?" Each name seemed to hit David like a physical blow. "We have the paper trail, the unauthorized contracts, everything." "Rebecca," David spat the name like a curse. "She's behind this, isn't she?" "Rebecca simply provided evidence of what we already suspected," Mark said. "Though I admit, even I didn't realize the full scope of your deception." David began to pace, his composure cracking. "You don't understand, any of you. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow, Mark? Perfect Mark Taylor, the devoted son, the brilliant CEO, the grieving widower everyone admires. I had to make my own way, create my own success. By stealing from our company, Mark's voice rose slightly. By betraying our family's trust? Family? David laughed bitterly. Is that what we are? Then why are you sleeping with my ex-fiancée? The crude accusation hung in the air for a moment before Alba stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. You lost any right to comment on my personal life when you chose Sarah over me. Again. Something in her tone made David pause. What do you mean, again? We know about the affair, she said quietly. During our engagement, just like with Rebecca, Sarah Chen seems to be a pattern with you, David. The mention of Sarah's name seemed to trigger something in David. His expression shifted from anger to desperation. Sarah understands me. She knows what it's like to want more, to need more. And does she know about the money you've been diverting from your joint accounts? Mark asked pointedly. Rebecca mentioned Sarah's having second thoughts about the wedding. History really does repeat itself, doesn't it, brother? David lunged forward suddenly, but Mark was faster, stepping between him and Alba. Before the situation could escalate further, Elizabeth Taylor's voice cut through the tension. That's quite enough, David. She stood in the doorway, elegant and imposing, with Rebecca Hamilton beside her. Both women wore expressions of quiet determination. Mother, David started, but Elizabeth held up a hand. I've heard enough, she said coolly. Rebecca has shown me everything. The board has been briefed. Your position at Taylor Industries is terminated, effective immediately. David's face contorted. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. Yes, you are. Elizabeth's voice softened slightly. Which is why we're handling this internally rather than involving the authorities. Yet, what does that mean? David demanded. Mark stepped forward. It means we're offering you a choice. Option 1, you resign quietly, repay every cent you've diverted, and sign an agreement never to work in finance again. We'll provide a generous severance package and keep the details private. And option 2, David's voice was barely a whisper. We turn everything over to the SEC, Alba said firmly. Every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence Rebecca has collected. Your choice. David's eyes darted between them, Mark's resolute stance, Alba's quiet strength, Elizabeth's stern disappointment, Rebecca's calm determination. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. What about Sarah? He asked, suddenly sounding very young. That's between you and her, Elizabeth said, though I suggest complete honesty this time. She deserves that much. The next hour passed in a blur of documents and signatures. David signed everything put in front of him, his usual confidence replaced by a shell-shocked numbness. When it was done, he stood to leave, but paused at the door. I did love you, Alba, he said quietly. In my way. Alba felt Mark tense beside her, but kept her voice steady. Your way wasn't enough. Not for me, not for Rebecca, and probably not for Sarah either. I hope you find peace, David, and I hope you learn what real love looks like. After he left, the office fell into heavy silence. Elizabeth was the first to speak. Well, that was rather more dramatic than our usual board meetings. She turned to Alba and Mark. You handled it beautifully, both of you. Rebecca stepped forward, hugging Alba tightly. You were amazing, so different from how I handled it. You helped make this possible, Alba reminded her. We couldn't have done it without you. As the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, the real work began. There were press statements to craft, investors to reassure, restructuring to implement. Alba and Mark worked late into the night, their professional partnership stronger than ever. Around midnight, Mark found Alba in her office, still reviewing documents. You should rest, he said softly, massaging her shoulders. Almost done, she murmured, leaning back into his touch. Just want to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow's announcements. Mark turned her chair to face him, kneeling beside her. You know what I realized today? What's that? Watching you handle everything, the confrontation, the fallout, the business implications, I fell in love with you all over again. Alba's heart skipped. Even with all this mess? Especially with all this mess. Mark smiled, taking her hands in his. You're extraordinary, Alba Darcy. You faced down your past, protected this company, and somehow managed to show compassion to someone who hurt you deeply. That's real strength. I had help, she reminded him, squeezing his hands. You, Rebecca, your mother, I'm not alone anymore. No, Mark agreed, pulling her to her feet. You're not alone, and you never will be again. They stood together at her office window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, press conferences, board meetings, damage control, but tonight, in this moment, they had each other. Mark? Alba turned in his arms. Remember that promise ring you gave me? Of course. She smiled, touching the sapphire on her right hand. I think I'm ready for it to be more than a promise. Mark's eyes widened. Alba, are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to build a life with you. I'm saying that sometimes the worst moments lead us to our best futures. She touched his face gently. I'm saying yes, before you even ask the question. The kiss they shared was sweet and deep, full of promises and possibilities. When they finally parted, Mark rested his forehead against hers. I'll do it properly, he promised. Ring, romance, everything you deserve. Alba laughed softly. I don't need grand gestures. I just need you. As if on cue, both their phones buzzed. More press inquiries about David's departure from the company. The real world intruding on their moment. Back to work, Mark asked with a rueful smile. Back to work, Alba agreed. Together. And that, she realized, was what real love looked like, facing challenges side by side, supporting each other through storms, finding joy in quiet moments. It wasn't about fairy tales or perfect endings. It was about building something strong and true, day by day, choice by choice. As they turned back to their tasks, hand in hand, Alba knew that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be more challenges ahead, more storms to weather, more moments of doubt and triumph, but they would face them all together, stronger for having found each other through the darkness. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories aren't about love at first sight or grand romantic gestures. Sometimes they're about two people who find each other exactly when they need to, who build something extraordinary from the ashes of what was lost, who choose each other every day despite the complications and challenges. This was their love story, not perfect but real, not easy but worth it, and it was only just beginning. Chapter 11. New Horizons. The antique jeweler's shop in Mayfair was tiny, tucked between a high-end patisserie and a bespoke tailor. Alba had discovered it during one of her wandering walks through London, something she'd taken to doing in the early mornings before work. The ring had caught her eye immediately. A vintage gold band with subtle Art Deco detailing, masculine yet elegant. It reminded her of Mark, classic, understated, with hidden depths that revealed themselves only upon closer inspection. It's from the 1920s, the elderly jeweler explained, carefully polishing the band. Made for a duchess who proposed to her longtime companion. Quite scandalous at the time. His eyes twinkled. Less so now, I should think. Alba smiled, watching him box the ring carefully. Did they have their happy ending, the Duchess and her companion? 40 years of marriage, according to the provenance papers. Sometimes the best love stories are the ones that break convention. Now, 3 weeks later, The ring sat in her desk drawer at Hamilton Financial, while Alba tried to focus on the morning's video conference with the Taylor Industries board. Mark was flying in tonight, ostensibly for a series of meetings about the proposed joint venture, but really because they couldn't bear to go more than a week without seeing each other. "The numbers for the Asian restructuring are exceeding projections," she reported, pulling up the latest charts. "The transition team has managed to salvage most of the relationships damaged by previous management." They all knew she meant David, but no one mentioned him directly anymore. He and Sarah had settled into their new life in Singapore, and recent reports suggested he was actually doing well in his more modest position. Sometimes, Alba reflected, losing everything was the only way to find your true path. "Excellent work, Ms. Darcy," Gerald Anderson said, his initial skepticism about her role long forgotten. "And the proposed joint venture with Hamilton Financial? Rebecca and I are finalizing the structure now. We believe by combining Taylor Industries' global reach with Hamilton's innovative financial technology, we can create something truly revolutionary." The meeting continued, but Alba's mind kept drifting to the ring in her drawer and the future it represented. She and Mark had built something remarkable together, a relationship that strengthened both of them while preserving their independence. The physical distance between London and New York had only proven how solid their foundation was. "Earth to Alba." Rebecca's voice broke through her thoughts. The video conference had ended, and her friend was looking at her knowingly. "Thinking about tonight? Is it that obvious? You've been touching your desk drawer every 5 minutes." Rebecca's smile was warm. "Have you decided how you're going to do it?" Alba had, actually. She'd spent weeks planning the perfect moment, only to realize that with Mark, perfection wasn't what mattered. What mattered was honesty, vulnerability, the courage to say what was in her heart. "I'm cooking dinner," she admitted, making Rebecca laugh. "You're proposing and attempting to cook. Brave woman." Rebecca's expression softened. "He'll love it, you know, both the ring and the gesture. Mark appreciates meaning over grandeur." "That's part of why I love him," Alba said softly. "He sees the value in small moments, in quiet certainties." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. Alba left the office early, a habit she'd developed since moving to London, part of her commitment to building a more balanced life. Her flat in Notting Hill was modest by her standards, but its charm had captured her heart instantly. The small balcony overflowed with herbs, some actually thriving, and the kitchen, while tiny, had become her laboratory for culinary experiments. Tonight's attempt was shepherd's pie, a dish she'd been practicing for weeks. The first few attempts had been disasters, but she was improving. As she prepared the ingredients, she thought about how different this felt from her life a year ago. Back then, she'd been planning a wedding that was all surface, no substance. Now she was building a life with real foundations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "He's on his way." Called me from the airport, trying to hide how excited he is. "Good luck, darling." Alba smiled, touched by her future mother-in-law's support. Elizabeth had become a true friend and mentor, helping her navigate both personal and professional challenges with grace and wisdom. Another text, this one from Jenny back in New York. "The office isn't the same without you both, but seeing you so happy makes it worth it. P.S. Don't forget to send pictures of the ring on his finger." The shepherd's pie was just coming out of the oven, looking surprisingly edible when she heard his key in the lock. Mark appeared in her kitchen doorway, travel-rumpled but handsome as ever in casual jeans and a soft sweater that made her want to curl up against him. "Something smells," he paused diplomatically. "Choose your next words very carefully," Alba warned, but she was already moving into his arms, where she fit perfectly. "Wonderful," he finished, kissing her softly. Everything smells wonderful, including you. He nuzzled her neck. New perfume? Cooking aromas and anxiety sweat, she joked. But her heart was racing. The ring box felt heavy in her apron pocket. Over dinner, which was actually quite good, though Alba was too nervous to eat much, they caught up on their week apart. Mark had been dealing with the final stages of the David situation, ensuring all the legal loose ends were tied up. He sent a letter, Mark said quietly, to Mother, but really to all of us. A real apology this time, not just excuses. He's been seeing a therapist, working through his competitive issues. Sarah's apparently been a good influence. I'm glad, Alba said, and meant it. Everyone deserves a chance to become better. Speaking of becoming better, Mark gestured to his empty plate. Your cooking has improved dramatically. Should I be worried about losing my position as household chef? Never, Alba laughed, then grew serious. Actually, speaking of positions and changes, there's something I want to ask you. She stood, pulling Mark to his feet and leading him to the balcony. The evening was clear for once, the London sky painted in stunning shades of purple and gold. Below, the street buzzed with life, couples walking hand in hand, families heading home, the occasional black cab gliding past. Mark Taylor, Alba began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You have been my partner in every sense of the word. You've supported my dreams while helping me build new ones. You've loved me through challenges and celebrated my victories as if they were your own. She pulled the ring box from her pocket, opening it to reveal the vintage band. Mark's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. You once gave me a ring as a promise, she continued. Now I'm giving you one as a question. Will you marry me? Not because it's expected or traditional, but because I want to build a life with you in London and New York and wherever else our dreams take us. Mark's smile was radiant as he pulled her close. You're proposing to me? Well, you were taking too long, she teased, though her hands trembled slightly. And I've learned that sometimes you have to take charge of your own happiness, unless you think it's too soon. His kiss was answer enough, but he pulled back to say it anyway. I've been ready to marry you since the day you first challenged my financial projections in that board meeting 5 years ago. Yes, Alba Darcy, absolutely yes. As he slipped on the ring, which fit perfectly, he reached into his own jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Although you've rather stolen my thunder, he said with a laugh, opening it to reveal a stunning emerald ring. I was planning to propose this weekend. Alba laughed through happy tears as he placed it on her finger. So we're both wearing engagement rings. What will the press say? That we continue to do things our own way, Mark said, pulling her close. That we're partners in everything. That we're writing our own story. To be continued. Would you like me to continue with the remaining portion of this 600-line chapter, covering their announcement to family and friends, their business plans, and their vision for their future together? Chapter 12. Dreams Taking Flight. The news of their mutual proposals spread like wildfire through both London and New York's social circles. By morning, Alba's phone was buzzing constantly with congratulatory messages, but her favorite response came from Rebecca, who burst into her office carrying champagne and croissants. Only you two would manage to propose to each other on the same night, Rebecca laughed, popping the cork with expert precision. Though I must say, the timing is perfect for what I'm about to propose. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Project Phoenix and laid it on Alba's desk. Inside were detailed plans for the joint venture between Hamilton Financial and Taylor Industries, but with a twist Alba hadn't expected. I want you to be CEO, Rebecca said simply, not just of the joint venture, but of Hamilton Financial itself. I'm ready to step back, focus on board governance, and this merger of our companies would be the perfect transition point. Alba nearly choked on her champagne. "Rebecca, that's enormous. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Rebecca replied firmly. "You have the vision, the skills, and now the personal stability to take both companies into the future. Plus," she added with a wink, "it would solve your two-continent problem rather elegantly." The proposal was brilliant in its simplicity. The merged company would maintain major offices in both London and New York, allowing Alba and Mark to split their time between cities while growing their respective businesses. "Have you discussed this with Mark?" Alba asked, already running numbers in her head. "Not yet. I wanted you to have first refusal." Rebecca's smile was knowing, though something tells me he'll be supportive. Later that evening, over dinner at their favourite small French restaurant in Mayfair, Alba presented the idea to Mark. His response surprised her. "I've actually been thinking along similar lines," he admitted, pulling out his own folder. "Look at these projections. If we merge the companies and restructure under a new global holding company, we could create something revolutionary," Alba finished, excitement building as she reviewed his numbers. "Traditional finance meeting fintech innovation, East meeting West, and us meeting in the middle," Mark added softly, reaching for her hand across the table. Their engagement rings caught the candlelight, a matching set of promises. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning, both personal and professional. Elizabeth flew to London to help them house hunt, insisting they needed a proper home base in both cities. "This one," she declared, standing in the bay window of a Victorian townhouse in Notting Hill. "It has character, history, and room to grow." Her meaningful glance made Alba blush. The New York property hunt was equally successful, resulting in a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. "For when you need your Manhattan fix," Elizabeth explained, though they all knew the real reason for two homes was to maintain strong connections to both their business bases. The press was having a field day with their story. "Power couple rewrites rules of romance and business," read one headline. "Taylor-Darcy merger more than just business," declared another. "At least they're creative," Alba laughed, showing Mark the latest tabloid over their morning video call. They were still splitting time between continents until the merger was finalized. "Speaking of creative," Mark said, his expression turning serious, "I've been thinking about the wedding. What if we did something completely different?" His idea was perfect, a sunrise ceremony on a private yacht in the Mediterranean, followed by a week-long celebration with their closest friends and family, cruising between intimate ports and historic cities. "No media circus, no society expectations," he explained. "Just us, the people we love, and new horizons every day." The planning for both the merger and the wedding proceeded at a rapid pace. Board meetings blended with cake tastings, contract negotiations with flower selections. Through it all, Alba and Mark remained in perfect sync, supporting each other's decisions while maintaining their individual strengths. One particularly challenging day, when cultural differences between the London and New York offices threatened to derail a key merger component, Alba found unexpected support from an unlikely source. David sent an email. "Alba, I heard about the merger challenges. There's a consultant in Singapore who specializes in East-West business integration. I'm sending her details separately. She helped me understand a lot about cultural bridges in business. I know I have no right to offer advice, but I want you and Mark to succeed. You both deserve it. What you're building together, professionally and personally, is what I should have aspired to instead of chasing surface success. Be happy, both of you. David." The note brought unexpected tears to Alba's eyes. She forwarded it to Mark with a simple message: people really can change. His response was immediate. "Love changes everything. You taught me that." The consultant David recommended proved invaluable, helping them navigate the complex waters of merging not just companies but cultures. By summer, the framework for the new global entity was taking shape. Hamilton Taylor Global, Rebecca announced at the board presentation. A fusion of tradition and innovation, East and West, heart and mind. The vote was unanimous. As Alba and Mark stood together before both boards, presenting their shared vision for the future, she felt a sense of completion. This was what real partnership looked like, supporting each other's dreams while building new ones together. The personal side of their lives was blossoming too. Their London home was becoming a gathering place for friends and family. Sunday brunches on their terrace became a tradition, with Rebecca, Elizabeth and various friends dropping by to share news and plans. "You've built more than a company," Elizabeth observed one such Sunday, watching Alba and Mark move in perfect sync as they prepared coffee and pastries for their guests. "You've built a family." The wedding plans were coming together beautifully. They had chartered a stunning yacht, planned a route through the Greek islands, and kept the guest list intimate. The ceremony would take place at sunrise off the coast of Santorini, followed by a week of celebration and adventure. "Promise me something," Mark said one evening as they sat on their London terrace watching the sunset. "Promise me we'll never lose this sense of building something together, of facing each horizon as a team." Alba touched his engagement ring, then hers. "I promise. Every day, every challenge, every triumph. Together." The merger was set to complete the week before their wedding, a timing that felt somehow perfect. They would step into their new roles as husband and wife and business partners simultaneously, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "You know," Rebecca mused during their final wedding planning session, "most people would say this is all too much at once. Merger, marriage, moving between continents. But watching you two, it's like you thrive on building things together." "That's because we do," Alba replied simply. "Every challenge makes us stronger. Every project brings us closer." As their wedding day approached, Alba found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The heartbreak that had led to healing, the professional challenges that had forged their bond, the love that had grown not from dramatic gestures, but from quiet understanding and unwavering support. One night, unable to sleep, she found Mark in their home office, working on merger details. Without a word, he opened his arms, and she settled onto his lap, both of them looking out at the London skyline. "Having second thought?" he asked softly. "About marrying you?" "Never." She touched his engagement ring. "About merging two major financial institutions while planning a wedding and maintaining homes in two countries. Maybe a few." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "We do like to challenge ourselves." "That's why we work," Alba replied, turning to face him. "We're not afraid of challenges because we face them together." Their kiss was soft, full of promise and understanding. Outside, the city hummed with life, a reminder of all the possibilities that lay ahead. Inside, in the quiet of their shared space, they were building something extraordinary. A love story written not in grand gestures, but in daily choices, shared dreams, and the courage to keep growing together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, merger documents to finalize, wedding details to confirm, homes to furnish, lives to combine. But tonight, in the peace of their London home, Alba and Mark were exactly where they needed to be, together, planning their next adventure, ready to face whatever the future might bring. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about perfect moments or fairy tale endings. They're about finding someone who makes you better, stronger, more yourself. Someone who helps you build not just a life, but a legacy. And as Alba and Mark held each other in the quiet of their London night, they knew they were building exactly that. A legacy of love, partnership, and the courage to dream bigger with every new dawn. Chapter 13. Love Without Borders. The Mediterranean dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, its light dancing across the calm waters surrounding Santorini. Alba stood alone on the yacht's upper deck, watching the sun emerge from the horizon. In less than an hour, she would marry Mark, but this quiet moment belonged to her, a chance to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. Her wedding dress, a flowing silk creation that caught the morning breeze, was nothing like the elaborate gown she'd chosen for her almost wedding to David. This dress, like her love for Mark, was elegant in its simplicity, strong in its authenticity. "You look like a goddess," Elizabeth's voice came softly from behind her. Mark's mother approached, carrying a small blue velvet box. Something borrowed, and something blue. Inside was a stunning sapphire pendant, Caroline's. Alba's breath caught. "Mark doesn't know I brought it," Elizabeth said quietly. "Caroline wore it at their wedding, and she told me once. She told me that when Mark found love again, it should be passed on. She knew, even then, that true love doesn't end with loss. It just changes form." Tears pricked Alba's eyes as Elizabeth fastened the pendant around her neck. "She would have loved you, you know," Elizabeth continued. "Your strength, your independence, the way you love her son while honoring his past." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rebecca, stunning in her maid-of-honor dress. "Ready?" The guests are gathering, and there's a certain CEO who's wearing a path in the deck below. The intimate gathering of 40 guests waited on the main deck, where white flowers and gauzy fabric created a dreamlike setting against the backdrop of Santorini's whitewashed cliffs. But Alba saw only Mark, standing at the end of the aisle in a light linen suit, his eyes finding hers with a look of such pure love it made her heart skip. As she walked toward him, memories flooded her mind. Their first meeting in his office, late nights working side by side, the quiet support he'd offered through her darkest times, the partnership they'd built from friendship to love. Each step brought her closer, not just to her future husband, but to the life they'd created together. The ceremony was deeply personal. Instead of traditional vows, they shared letters they'd written to each other. Mark went first, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Alba, my partner, my challenge, my home. You came into my life when I thought I'd closed my heart forever, and you taught me that love isn't about replacing what's lost, it's about growing something new. You've never asked me to forget my past. Instead, you've helped me build a future that honors all parts of who I am. I promise to love you not just in grand moments like this, but in quiet Monday mornings over coffee, in challenging board meetings, in late-night strategy sessions, and in every adventure we choose to face together. You are my equal, my inspiration, and my favorite person to build dreams with. Today, I'm not just gaining a wife. I'm celebrating the amazing woman who has been my partner in every sense of the word. I promise to support your dreams as fiercely as you've supported mine, to challenge you when you need pushing, and to always be your safe harbor when you need rest. With you, every day feels like a new opportunity to grow, to learn, to love more deeply. I promise to keep growing with you, learning with you, and loving you more with each sunrise we share." Alba's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded her letter. "Mark, my rock, my partner, my unexpected love story. You once told me that sometimes the best things in life come from our biggest challenges. You were right, because losing what I thought was love led me to discovering what love truly means. With you, I've learned that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about someone who shows up day after day with understanding in their heart and support in their hands. Someone who sees your strength even when you doubt it, who challenges you to be better while loving you exactly as you are. I promise to be your partner in all things, in business and in life, in challenges and in triumphs. I promise to keep building with you, dreaming with you, growing with you, to honor your past while creating our future, to love you not despite your scars, but because of how they've shaped you into the amazing man you are. Today, I'm not just becoming your wife. I'm celebrating the extraordinary journey that brought us here and the limitless horizons that lie ahead. I promise to face every new dawn by your side, grateful for the gift of loving you and being loved by you. There wasn't a dry eye on the deck as they exchanged rings. His original engagement ring joined by a matching band, her emerald ring paired with a delicate diamond band that complemented without overshadowing. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was sweet with promise and understanding. As applause erupted around them, the yacht's horn sounded and white doves were released into the morning sky. Elizabeth's surprised touch. The celebration that followed was exactly what they'd dreamed of. Intimate, joyful, and full of personal touches. They sailed through the Greek islands, stopping at picturesque ports for private celebrations. Each evening brought a different theme, honoring the various aspects of their lives together. One night was dedicated to their business success, with Rebecca giving a touching speech about watching their professional partnership bloom into love. Another celebrated their British-American union, complete with playfully stereotypical foods and decorations from both cultures. On their final night at sea, they hosted a special dinner under the stars. The yacht's crew had transformed the upper deck into a magical space with thousands of twinkling lights and soft music floating on the breeze. As their loved ones shared stories and laughter, Alba found herself overwhelmed by the fullness of her heart. "Dance with me," Mark whispered, pulling her away from the table. As they swayed together under the Mediterranean stars, he asked, "Any regrets?" "Just one," Alba replied, smiling up at him, "that we didn't do this sooner." "No," he said thoughtfully, "I think our timing was perfect. We needed to become who we are to be ready for this." Later that night, long after their guests had retired, they stood together at the ship's rail, watching moonlight dance on the waves. "I have something for you," Mark said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Inside was a deed to a small villa overlooking the sea, not far from where they were anchored. "For weekends, when London and New York feel too urban, a place that's just ours." Alba's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the photos of the sun-washed stone house with its blue shutters and bougainvillea-draped terrace. "It's perfect. Our own piece of paradise. I thought we could come here when we need to remind ourselves what matters most," Mark explained. "Away from board meetings and business mergers, just us." They spent their final honeymoon days at the villa, making plans and creating memories. The small town welcomed them warmly, and they found themselves falling in love with the slower pace of life, the fresh markets, the friendly neighbors who didn't care about corporate mergers or society pages. But reality beckoned, and soon they were flying back to London for the official launch of Hamilton Taylor Global. The press conference was a triumph, with Alba and Mark presenting their vision for the future, while clearly demonstrating the partnership that made them so effective. "They're calling you the new face of modern business leadership," Rebecca commented at the celebration afterward. "A power couple that proves personal and professional success aren't mutually exclusive." Their first months as newlyweds brought both challenges and joys. Merging two global companies while building a marriage required careful balance, but they found their rhythm. Mornings began with coffee and market reports in whichever city they were in. Evenings ended with shared stories and plans for the future. One particularly hectic week, when cultural clashes between the London and New York offices threatened to derail a major initiative, they found strength in their partnership. Alba's diplomatic skills complemented Mark's strategic thinking, and together they turned the crisis into an opportunity for greater understanding between teams. "That's why we work," Alba said later, curled against Mark in their London home. "We're better together than apart." Life settled into a pattern of transatlantic flights and video calls when they were separated. But they made every moment together count. Their homes in both cities became gathering places for friends and family, filled with laughter and love. Elizabeth was a frequent visitor to both locations, delighting in her role as mother and mentor. "You've created something remarkable," she told them over Sunday brunch in New York. "Not just the company, but this family we've all become." The business thrived under their joint leadership. Hamilton Taylor Global became known for innovation balanced with stability, for pushing boundaries while maintaining integrity. Their different perspectives and complementary strengths created a leadership style that earned respect worldwide. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Mark bringing Alba tea during late-night work sessions, Alba surprising Mark with impromptu dance breaks during stressful days, both of them making time for simple pleasures despite their demanding schedules. Their Greek villa became their refuge, a place where titles and responsibilities fell away. They spent holidays there, gradually making it their own with collected treasures and shared memories. The local community adopted them as part-time residents, including them in festivals and celebrations. One evening, as they sat on their villa's terrace watching the sunset, Alba shared news that would change their lives again. They were going to be parents. Mark's joy was boundless, his tears matching hers as they dreamed of their family's future. "Our child will have the best of all worlds," he said, holding her close. "London's history, New York's energy, Greece's heart. And us," Alba added softly. "Partners in everything, showing them what real love looks like." The news energized them to work harder on creating a legacy worth passing on. They established the Hamilton Taylor Foundation, focusing on educational opportunities for underprivileged youth and women in business. Their personal happiness spilled over into a desire to help others find their paths. As Alba's pregnancy progressed, they began adapting their transatlantic life to prepare for their new arrival. The London home's spare room became a nursery, decorated with stars and clouds that reminded them of their wedding day at sea. The New York apartment gained a similar space, ensuring their child would feel at home in both cities. One night, unable to sleep, Alba found Mark in his home office, working on plans for the foundation. Without a word, he opened his arms, and she settled onto his lap, their unborn child safely between them. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied. "Sometimes I think about that day you first tried to warn me about David, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd listened then." "Everything happened exactly as it needed to," Mark said, kissing her temple. "Every step led us here." As they sat together in the quiet of their London night, Alba reflected on their journey. From broken hearts to healing, from professional respect to deep love, from individual success to shared dreams, they had built something extraordinary together. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was built on understanding, respect, and the kind of love that grew stronger with every challenge. It was about two people who found each other when they weren't looking, who built a partnership that encompassed all aspects of life, who proved that sometimes the longest road leads to the best destination. As their child moved beneath her heart, Alba thought about the legacy they were creating, not just of business success or social impact, but of love that transforms and heals. A legacy of partnership, of dreams shared and multiplied, of hearts that found their home in each other. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges, of course, balancing family with their global responsibilities, navigating cultural differences, maintaining their connection across time zones. But they would face it all together, partners in every sense of the word, because sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about perfect moments or fairy tale endings. They're about two people who choose each other every day, who build something stronger than themselves, who find home in each other's hearts no matter where in the world they are. And as Mark held her close in the quiet of their London night, their child safe between them and their dreams stretching endlessly ahead, Alba knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. Chapter 14. Wings of Hope. 5 years had passed since that Mediterranean wedding, and Alba stood at the window of their London penthouse, watching her daughter Sophia play in the rooftop garden with Mark. At 4 years old, Sophia was the perfect blend of them both, Mark's thoughtful grey eyes and Alba's determined spirit. She had grown into a child who moved confidently between continents, equally at home in London's rain and New York's energy. The sight of Mark teaching Sophia about the herbs they grew, a hobby Alba had finally mastered, brought tears to her eyes, or perhaps that was just the hormones. Their second child was due in 3 months, and this pregnancy had made her especially reflective. "Mama!" Sophia called out, waving excitedly. "Daddy's showing me the lavender you used to burn." Alba laughed, remembering her early cooking disasters. She joined them in the garden, where Mark immediately pulled her into his arms, one hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "Tell me again," Sophia demanded, settling into her favourite story-time spot on the garden bench, "about how you and Daddy fell in love." "Well," Alba began, exchanging a smile with Mark, "sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with a broken heart." That evening they hosted a special dinner party. Rebecca was in town for the quarterly board meeting of Hamilton Taylor Global, which had grown into one of the world's most respected financial institutions. Elizabeth was there too, along with several women who had graduated from their foundation's mentorship program. As Alba looked around the table at these successful women, many of whom had overcome their own heartbreaks and setbacks, she felt compelled to share something personal. "6 years ago," she began, rising to address the group, "I thought my life was over when I was left at the altar. I felt humiliated, broken, worthless, but that moment of deepest pain became the catalyst for my greatest joy." She reached for Mark's hand before continuing. "I learned that our worst moments don't define us. They refine us. They show us what we're made of and what we're capable of becoming." "Hamilton Taylor Global isn't just a company," Mark added, standing beside her. "It's proof that something beautiful can rise from ashes. That partnership, in business and in life, is about supporting each other's growth, not limiting it." Rebecca raised her glass. "To second chances and stronger hearts." "And to the women who find their own way," Elizabeth added, her eyes twinkling as she bounced Sophia on her knee. Later that night, after their guests had gone and Sophia was asleep, Alba found a package on her desk. Inside was a letter from an unexpected source, David. "Dear Alba, Sarah and I saw the article about the Hamilton Taylor Foundation's work with women rebuilding their lives after setbacks. I wanted you to know that your story, your resilience, your growth, your triumph has inspired more people than you know. What I did to you was unforgivable, but you turned that pain into purpose. You and Mark have created something remarkable, not just a business empire, but a legacy of hope. Our daughter asks about her Aunt Sophia sometimes, having seen pictures in the society pages. I tell her that Sophia's mother is one of the strongest women I know, someone who showed me that true grace means rising above pain to help others. Be proud of who you've become. You didn't just survive, you soared." David. Alba shared the letter with Mark, who held her close as she processed its meaning. "He's right, you know," Mark said softly. "You did more than heal. You helped create a movement. Do you know how many women have found their strength through your example?" The foundation they'd established had grown beyond its initial scope. now offering comprehensive support for women rebuilding their lives after personal or professional setbacks. They provided education, mentorship, and seed funding for new businesses. But more importantly, they offered hope, living proof that endings could become beginnings. Alba thought about all the women she'd met through their programs, executives rebuilding careers after setbacks, entrepreneurs rising from financial ruin, hearts healing from betrayal. Each one had taught her something about resilience, about the strength found in supporting other women. "We should tell them all," Alba said suddenly, turning to Mark. "The whole story. Not just the society pages version, but the real journey. About how love isn't always where you first look for it, how strength often comes after breaking, how the right partner supports your growth instead of clipping your wings." And so, on the 5th anniversary of Hamilton Taylor Global, they published their story, not as a fairy tale, but as a testament to real love and resilience. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of letters from women worldwide sharing their own stories of heartbreak and healing. In their Greek villa that summer, with Sophia playing in the garden and their second child kicking steadily beneath Alba's heart, they read some of these letters together. "You showed me that my broken engagement wasn't the end of my story," one woman wrote. "Today, I run my own company, and I'm engaged to someone who celebrates my success instead of feeling threatened by it. I thought I had to choose between love and career," another shared. "You proved that with the right partner you can have both, not through compromise, but through mutual support and understanding." As the Mediterranean sun set on another perfect day, Alba and Mark sat on their terrace, Sophia sleeping peacefully between them. Their journey had become more than just their own love story. It had become a beacon of hope for others. To all the women reading this, Alba had written in the book's dedication, "Remember, a broken heart is not your ending, it's your beginning. Your pain can become your power. Your tears can water the gardens of your future. And true love, the kind that lifts you higher instead of holding you down, is worth waiting for. Look for the one who sees your strength, who supports your dreams, who loves you not despite your scars, but because of how they've shaped you. Remember that sometimes the longest detours lead to the best destinations. Most importantly, remember this: you are not defined by who didn't love you, but by how you love yourself and others. Your heart's ability to heal and grow stronger is your superpower. Use it, share it, celebrate it. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with a broken heart, but they don't end there. They end with wings." As if in response to these thoughts, their unborn child kicked strongly. Mark placed his hand over Alba's belly, and Sophia stirred slightly between them, creating a perfect moment of family connection. "We did it," Alba whispered, looking at their daughter, their home, the empire they'd built together. "No," Mark corrected gently, pulling her closer. "You did it. You turned pain into power, heartbreak into healing, and in doing so, you showed others they could too. I just had the privilege of loving you through it." Their eyes met in the fading light, filled with the same understanding and partnership that had carried them through every challenge and triumph. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about being rescued. They're about finding someone who gives you space to rescue yourself, who helps you build wings instead of clipping them, who loves you not for who you might become, but for who you already are. And as the stars began to appear over their Mediterranean paradise, Alba knew that their story would continue inspiring others, because real love, the kind that heals, strengthens and uplifts, never truly ends. It just keeps growing, healing, and helping others soar. The end. Subscribe if you liked.